Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。Do you remember how the collective West turned against Chinese tech giant Huawei over claims China would use the technology for nefarious purposes? Well, as I always say on this show, every accusation from the West is an admission of guilt. And that was proven just last week when dozens and dozens of people were killed and many more injured as pagers and walkie-talkies began to simultaneously explode across Lebanon and Syria. The attack was masterminded by Israel, whose proponents claim the target was Hezbollah. But that hasn't stopped many around the world labeling it as a terrorist attack. So what are the ramifications? Can Western technology be trusted? And will this latest nail in the Western coffin simply speed up the already mammoth shift to a fairer, multipolar world? Today I'll ask my special guest, host of the Geopolitical Economy Report, Ben Norton. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. As of September 22nd, 42 people had been confirmed dead and thousands more injured following the detonation of thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies across Lebanon and Syria last week, signaling a terrifying shift in the extent Israel and the collective West will go to hold on to power. To fill us in on the latest, I'm joined by journalist and analyst Ben Norton, who released a very informative video report on the pager attacks last night. You can find the link in the description below. Ben, welcome back to the show. Just for our viewers who might not fully understand the situation, I wondered if you could tell us what exactly happened on the 17th and 18th of last week.
Thanks for having me. It's important to understand that this represents kind of the opening of Pandora's box, the weaponization of civilian technology. And what happened is that Israeli intelligence agents, over an operation that allegedly goes back years, they created shell companies posing as manufacturers of consumer technological products like pagers and walkie-talkies. And meanwhile, they put explosives in those technologies, and then they were exported to Lebanon, and they blew up. Israel launched an attack, blew them all up at the same time in this coordinated attack, and killed dozens of people, including civilians, at least 4 children, although that number has been increasing. And also thousands of people were injured, again, including many civilians. There are horrifying videos of them blowing up in cars, in taxi cabs, in grocery stores. And really what this amounts to is an act of terrorism. What's amazing is that even the former CIA director, Leon Panetta, who is very skilled in the art of terrorism, even he acknowledged that what Israel did was an act of terrorism in Lebanon. And this was really the opening salvos of what is now a new war. And Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, who is facing charges of crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court, he announced after this attack that a new phase of the war has begun. Israel has been launching brutal airstrikes in Lebanon. In one day, on the 23rd of September, they killed more than 500 people in Lebanon, including many civilians. So this was really a horrifying opening attack for a larger war. And of course, this is continuing with the horrific war going on in Gaza as well. And Israel is being investigated on charges of genocide at the International Court of Justice for the war in Gaza. So now we see that conflict expanding further.
It's really terrifying. And what is the link with Taiwan?
Yes, well, Israel, when they created the shell company, they created a company based in Hungary, in Europe, which is called BAC Consulting, which manufactured pagers. And some of their customers were normal people. So they did actually create civilian technology like walkie-talkies and pagers. But they also created this weaponized technology with explosives in it. And the brand name on this technology was a Taiwanese company called Go to Polo. So that means that there's the brand name on the technology is Taiwanese. It was manufactured in a shell company based in Hungary by Israeli intelligence agents. It involves Taiwan province, it involves Hungary in Europe, and it involves Israel. Now, Taiwanese authorities have denied knowledge of this attack. Hungarian authorities have also denied that. We do know that some of the extremist forces in Taiwan that are pro-West and are anti-mainland have been very sympathetic to Israel, whereas, of course, mainland China has always been a close friend of the Palestinian people and supported their struggle for human rights and recognition internationally.
Now, some people might say that what Israel did is perhaps fair game because the target was Hezbollah, who they call a terrorist group. Do you think that's a valid argument?
Well, this is one of these cases, again, where the West, a small handful of countries in the West, claim that a group is a so-called terrorist organization. But in reality, the vast majority of countries on Earth do not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. What is Hezbollah? Well, this is an organization that has both an armed wing and a political arm. So inside Lebanon's democratically elected parliament, there are many political parties. Among them is Hezbollah. And in fact, Hezbollah, the political party, is part of the ruling coalition in government right now in Lebanon. And in fact, most countries on Earth, the vast majority, do not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, including, interestingly, some countries in Europe do not recognize Hezbollah's political arm as a terrorist organization, like France. France has maintained formal political ties with the Hezbollah political party. So the US and Israel and a few allies, Australia, Japan, they claim that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, but that's not according to international law. The United Nations does not recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Unlike a very different group like Al-Qaeda, which is recognized internationally by international bodies and international law as a terrorist organization. They're very different. In fact, you know who one of the main victims of Al-Qaeda has been historically? Is Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah as a political movement is largely affiliated with Shia Islam, which is a minority within Islam internationally. And the Sunni extremist fundamentalists, not most Sunni Muslims around the world, most are not extremists, but among Sunni extremists, they see Shia Muslims, like from Iran, like from Iraq, like from Hezbollah and Lebanon, they see them as apostates. And many of the terrorist attacks committed against people in the region in West Asia are against Shia Muslims from groups like Hezbollah. So this is one of the most misunderstood groups. And the reason that it's so misunderstood, of course, is because the US and Israel have demonized this group. One final note here. Where does Hezbollah come from? Why does it have an armed wing? It comes from the Israeli military occupation of Lebanon. So just as Israel has illegally militarily occupied Palestinian territory for decades, according to international law, and every year at the UN General Assembly, the vast majority of countries on Earth demand an end to Israel's illegal occupation. Well, similarly, in 1982, Israel invaded South Lebanon and then launched a brutal war. In 1985, they officially declared a military occupation of Lebanon that continued until 2000. So this was an illegal 2-decade-long Israeli occupation. Why did Israel eventually leave Lebanon? Well, because the Lebanese people organized groups to fight to expel the Israeli military occupiers. And one of those groups that was formed was Hezbollah. So it was a product of the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. They expelled the Israeli occupiers, defending Lebanese sovereignty. And that's why there are a lot of people in Lebanon who support Hezbollah. That's why it became a political party. And that's why it has both an armed wing and a political arm. It's a result of this Israeli attack that has constantly continued in the 1980s and the 90s. And then in 2006, Israel waged another war in Lebanon. And now, unfortunately, we see yet another war.
Yeah, it goes to show how important it is to look at recent history. Now, in your report, you mentioned how this terrorist attack has created massive distrust in Western supply chains and how China is seeing a huge uptick in orders from the global South. This is, of course, completely different from the narrative the West has been trying to paint of Chinese tech being untrustworthy and suspicious. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is such an important issue. And I think when we talk about these conflicts, people often focus on the geopolitical element, the war element, the military element. Obviously, those are extremely important, especially considering how many people are dying. But there's also a massive economic element here that needs to be discussed more. This has global implications for the entire economy, because what we've seen is that Israel has weaponized civilian technology. We're talking about pagers, we're talking about walkie talkies. And the reason that people in Lebanon were not using cell phones to communicate is because they know that Israel has technology that it has used to spy on people using cell phones. So Hezbollah, even though it's not just Hezbollah that was targeted in this attack, many civilians were killed and injured as well. But Hezbollah did order top officials to stop using cell phones and instead use pagers because it's much more difficult to spy on people using pagers. So that's why Israel weaponized this technology. So now what we see is that many people, not only in Lebanon, but also throughout West Asia, the Middle East, and throughout the world, many countries in the global south are now saying, we cannot trust this Western technology if it's linked to a North American firm, a European company, or even potentially, despite the fact that obviously Taiwan is part of China, but there are Taiwanese extremists who support the West and who are against the mainland. And now some people say we might not even be able to trust Taiwanese technology, but we can trust mainland Chinese technology because mainland China doesn't invade countries. It doesn't have 800 foreign military bases like the US. It doesn't organize regime change operations and coups and color revolutions. China has a non-interventionist foreign policy. So now a lot of people are saying we should instead buy technology from Huawei, from Xiaomi, from other Chinese firms, because one, we know that if the supply chain is located in mainland China, there are going to be no Western backdoors. What's a backdoor? Well, the US government, the National Security Agency of the US government, has admitted that it puts backdoors in technology, which is a way of putting in technology or software so they can use technology to spy on people. The CIA and the FBI have also done this. So the US government spies on people around the world. This was famously exposed by the former NSA and CIA whistleblower Edward Snowden a decade ago, who showed how the NSA was spying on people, including Western allies, including Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel was being spied on by the US authorities. So we know that the US has a history of spying on people. Now we know that US allies like Israel have weaponized this technology. So we've seen reports on Chinese social media that now Chinese companies are getting large numbers of orders from people in the Middle East and West Asia who want to make sure that the supply chain is secure, that it's only located in mainland China, that the technology is built in mainland China and then shipped directly from mainland China to the other country with no middlemen, because that's the way that they can ensure that their technology is not weaponized by the US, Israel, or their allies. This is a very dangerous moment because the US has not only politicized supply chains, the US has told other countries to be afraid of mainland China supposedly tampering. So this has been a narrative that the US has used for years now. But that narrative was already ridiculous when we know that the US spies on people with technology. But now it's an even more dangerous new era that we're in. Again, this is opening Pandora's box because it's not just about spying. This is a matter of security. People are afraid that if they buy technology that was tampered with by the West, they could be blown up.
Terrifying. And I think it goes to show, boosts the argument that China is probably the most sovereign nation in the world. So obviously, the US had a part in last week's attacks, right?
Well, officially, the US government has denied involvement. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said they didn't know about this, but that actually has been contradicted by reports, including in the New York Times. The New York Times did a long story. Of course, the Times is very closely linked to the CIA and US spy agencies. So the New York Times published this long report citing 12 different sources in US intelligence agencies and the Pentagon, and they revealed that Israel has been planning this, it had been planning this operation going back years, and that US intelligence agencies knew about it. Of course, Israel is very closely linked to the United States, especially Israeli Mossad, which this is the spy agency that carried out this attack, and the Israeli military are closely linked to US spy agencies and the US military. They train together. The US is the largest provider of weapons and military aid to Israel. The US by far gives the most. 67% of Israel's weapons imports come from the United States, 30% come from Germany. So the US can claim they have no involvement, but at the very least, according to the New York Times, US spy agencies knew that Israel was planning this. So even if the US wasn't directly involved, they gave a green light to this terrorist act. If they had opposed it, they would have told Israel not to carry it out. But obviously, Israel did carry it out, which means that they had approval from the US. And again, I should stress that all of what Israel is doing is only possible because of support from the United States. In fact, the top Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, published an article citing senior Israeli military officials, acknowledging that were it not for US support, Israel could not carry out this war, this brutal war in Lebanon and this brutal war in Gaza. And again, Israel is facing charges of genocide in Gaza. So it's because of the US, the tens of billions of dollars of military support provided by the US, that Israel is even able to do this in the first place.
Okay, last up today, what would your advice be to anyone who's worried following last week's attacks? Should people really be worrying about what sort of phone they have or that they might be the target of spying or even worse?
Yeah, well, for most average people, I think you're not necessarily going to be blown up. But if you're involved in politics, it's increasingly dangerous. We now see that civilian technology has been weaponized by the West. And if you oppose what Israel does, if you support Palestinian human rights, if you even oppose some of what the US government does, it can start becoming very dangerous. And then there's also the aspect of espionage. We've known for years that the US has built these backdoors in technology to spy. Israel also has been spying on people, famously through the Pegasus software that was exposed a few years ago. So really what this shows is that Chinese technology is much safer. If you're concerned about Israel spying on you, if you're concerned about the US government spying on you, it would make a lot of sense to get a Chinese phone, Chinese laptop, because we know we have so much evidence that Western countries have weaponized this technology. And this is especially the case for people in the global South. Like I said, I think more and more people around the world, especially those involved in politics, people in countries that have been invaded by the West, that have been targeted by illegal unilateral sanctions by the United States, those, I think a lot of politicians, activists, average people in those countries are going to start rethinking any purchases of technology from the West, technology from Japan, from South Korea, even from Taiwan province. And I think this will really help mainland Chinese firms. And increasingly, we'll see technology from other countries as well. Maybe Russia, maybe potentially, Vietnam is creating more and more technology. So I think this really, it's a very dangerous moment, but it also opens up more possibilities for more global South countries to actually have alternatives.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Ben Norton, host of the Geopolitical Economy Report.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Keep up the great work.
And on that note, that will be it for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think last week's pager explosions should be classified as terrorism? Are you worried about how this type of warfare might develop into the future? Let me know down below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.